as you're going to see tonight, we wanted to give a greater place to this H, the humanities, which is a component of the CSH. Indeed, I felt that very often, for some various reasons, the humanities are now a bit neglected in the whole social sciences picture, if you wish. So, in the eve of the 2015 International Women's Day, and also 20 years after the very important Beijing conference, the CSH is launching a series of social sciences and humanities discussions on feminism and gender, and the many ways these issues can be approached by a variety of disciplines, and particularly humanities. This evening, Professor Sukrita Paul Kumar has kindly accepted our invitation to open this discussion series. As many of you know already, Sukrita is an academic, but also a very well-known poet and critic, and she has already published immensely very important work. Let me introduce Sukrita a bit better. Sukrita was born in Kenya. She's an academic, as I said, a poet and critic. She holds the Aruna Asaf Ali Chair at Delhi University in Delhi. She's a fellow of the Indian Institute of Advanced Study in Shimla. She was also invited by a number of universities in the US, honorary fellow of the International Writing Program of the University of Iowa in the USA. She also worked with Hong Kong Baptist University in Hong Kong. As I told you, she's a very prolific, I think, writer and author. She has authored many books, including Narrating, Partition, and The New Story. Many poems, as you're going to see tonight, including Dreamcatcher, Poems Come Home, or Without Margin. And she's also a very interesting painter. As you can see here, we are exposing some of her painting. She will tell us much more about that. But we felt that this discussion could revolve around not only academic life, her poems, but also her painting work. In addition, we are very pleased to have with us Dr. Virginie Dutoya. Virginie holds a PhD from the French well-known political science institution Sciences Po Paris. She's now a researcher with the very French National Center for Research I was referring to before. And it's not surprising, she's a specialist of women's political representation and participation in India, but also in Pakistan. She's worked on a variety of issues in relation to this, and she's now in India for a short while. So we're very happy to have Virginie with us also. I think I've talked a lot already, but before I give the floor to our invitee, I'd like to maybe claim my right, my privilege as a chair to ask a very simple question. We are going to talk about women, feminism, gender. So I'd like to know actually what's a woman, what's feminism, what's gender. And I was thinking about that, and you know, as a good student, because I'm a lawyer, so officially have nothing to do with feminism, gender, poetry, and all that. But I was thinking about that, and so reread a very classic book everybody knows, I think, the seminal work of Judith Butler, Gender Trouble. And one of the chapters starts with some sort of very funny, I find, and very intriguing quotes. So if you don't mind, I'm going to quote the quotes. So she quotes 5 authors, 5 very important and well-known authors, to give some sort of definition of woman, gender, sex, and so on. She starts with a quote from Simone de Beauvoir. "One is not born a woman, but rather becomes one." Then she moves on with another famous yet controversial author, Julia Kristeva, another French. "Strictly speaking, woman cannot be said to exist." Puzzling, right? She moved on with Lys Irigaray. "Woman does not have a sex." And then, you know, for my lawyer mind, I was really lost. Then she moves on with Michel Foucault, another French. The deployment of sexuality established this notion of sex. And then when I particularly like, because again of my lawyer and political mind, I think, it's a quote from Monique Wittig. The category of sex is a political category that funds society as heterosexual.
I have been, yes, writing, words have been my medium and of expression in a big way, but I have always toyed with the idea of playing with the visuals. And I've always felt that when I have come to a deadlock, when I'm not able to express in words, when visions, visuals come into my mind, images come into my mind. Sometimes I struggle with them within words and build up images there. But many a times I break my pen and pick up not break really, I'm not violent, but I keep it aside and pick up my brushes. And long before I used to work with, I used to work with oils initially, which was very tedious. It was very, very tedious because you would wait for it to dry, and yet oils have their own language, and the flow is beautiful. But it really would have meant a lot of work to continue with the oils, and I'm not a professional. So with a lot of hesitation, I put up these paintings, and as I said, it's really a courage and a matter of courage. However, I find that there is a lot of crossing of boundaries that happens in my work in terms of what goes into my poetry and what goes into my paintings. And I don't really want to talk too much about it because it's there for you to see, and it's also, I'm going to read my poems and it's there for you to conclude. However, I do want to mention one or two things, and which is quite obvious though, that I feel personally very, very close to trees, very close to trees, and I identify, maybe in some janma of mine, avatar of mine, I was a tree myself, I don't know. I often say that there is a particular tree in Shimla where I often go to the Indian Institute of Advanced Study, and I have to meet my husband there. And who's my husband? It's the chinar tree there at the back. It's a beautiful tree. And as all husbands do, it ditches me many times. Sometimes it's very bare and it's very cruel, and I relate to it. And I don't have that particular painting here, but once it was very, very cruel to me when it became very stark and not responding to what I was trying to say in the winter at the time when the snows were all around. I actually painted that particular, in oils and tried to capture cruelty in a tree, So, it's basically transfer of some kind of an emotion or the other, but yes, I do identify a woman's image also with a tree, the twists and turns and all of that, and the aesthetics of it, just the aesthetics of a woman, being a woman. And I have, I think, during this process of trying to, move on from the feminine to the feminist to the female. I don't know if I'm right. Yeah, perhaps that, yes. It's been a journey. Because I remember the way I was brought up, it was the feminine that was kind of evoked. And then slowly, I think I traveled to the idea of being a feminist, which was more an intellectual engagement initially. And who was my guru? It was Simone de Beauvoir. And in fact, I've been trying many a times, when it comes to Simone de Beauvoir, it's very difficult. She's always with me somewhere. Right now, even you see her behind me somewhere. Yeah, it's there. It haunts. The image haunts. And it enters my poetry. It enters my, I don't even want to say it because the spirit is a very strong feminist spirit. And feminist in the positive sense, but not the screaming feminist, not the screeching feminist, But somebody who says, well, I can do it, and combines with the idea of Shakti and power and so on, and energy. Most of all, energy, I think. And the last bit, I do want to sort of say this journey from the, what did I say, when finally I reached the female. But then I think from that point, and I'll relate it to the quotation that you just now looked at. Judith Butler, by the way, is my very, very favorite, feminist, extremely favorite. And particularly if you listen to her and her voice, and more than her reading, if you watch her on the YouTube or something, it's fantastic. Her voice has that power, and so when she's talking about, it's like, when somebody, so the quotation talked about going beyond gender in one sense, and that doesn't mean only transgender, but something more. To me, it is androgyny. And that metaphor of androgyny is, you know, I think very crucial to my work. And that is why I relate very much with writers like Krishna Sopti in India, who actually wrote in the male voice by being very, very feminine, you know. So she actually called herself Hashmat, and she took on that voice and then wrote 3 volumes in that voice, which we call Hum Hashmat. And it's that androgynous ideal which you also see in Virginia Woolf, you know, where she's trying to locate the androgyny in herself and in other people. And Vishnu Prabhakar has a whole novel in Hindi called Ardhanarishwar, which is a novel which is dealing in a discursive way with the ideal of androgyny, which is half male, half female kind of situation, and not really typically transgender. That is another domain altogether. But androgyny, the realization of that ideal which questions binaries, male-female binaries. So I can go on, but I would slip into being a teacher if I just do that. I don't want to do that. So should I just slip into my poetry, and maybe we can come to our own conclusions at some point. Often, I step out of myself to watch, observe, and follow her, she who is perpetually trampling on a bed of thorns with bloody red sores on the soles of her feet, casting and recasting herself in the fast-changing and deviating streams of consciousness of people who reject, accept at their convenience. I sing to her that she may locate the center of her being. I weep with her that she may survive her sorrow. I am sheer delight when she hears the thunder, winces with the lightning, and sees me separate and aloof in the yonder. I then step back into myself. His name was Mahmoud Abu Hashash, Palestinian poet, well known. So I told him, I said, look, I'm dying to, you know, work on this translation. Can we work together on this poem? And of course we worked on the poem, but that was a translation, and out of that came another poem. And this is a response to that poem. Leila's Call, not yours, no? Let's see. Oh, guys, the eternal lover, if only you could come out, step out of your mystical yearnings, walk out of your longings frozen in verses, and see your Leila. Hear her pounding heart, feel her lamenting soul. If only, guys, history could release you, and geography could perhaps find you, you camouflaged in clouds of love, traveling through time and space, century after century, blowing images of Leila into caves and tombs. You fettered in words and epitaphs, Leila stuck forever on the potter's wheel, rotating between the cups of your palms, your fingers chiseling and shaping her forever. But guys, Leila is whole. As the complete circle of the full moon, a planet amongst planets, your poems are the gurgling waves of the ocean, leaping in to reach the skies, and withdrawing merely with the reflection, tired and limp on the surface of the placid waters. Love is a blessing, says Leila, not a curse. My Majnun, my Qais, says she, come to me, fear not death. Your wish for immortality keeps us apart. Wow. So I think it was this stage, you know, which I needed to capture, which I think feminism begins to happen at that time.
I think what interested me here is that it can help me try to bridge 3 words or 3 things that really interest me, which is first, obviously, a social science. I mean, I'm the social science part of the title. Feminism, and also literature. I mean, poetry as well, but more broadly literature. And trying to see how we can participate in the same project. And I think that's something that we can try to discuss now. I mean, that's what I think could be interesting to bring about. And first, maybe I think it would be great if you could give us a little bit more details on how poetry enables you, or do you feel it's a good medium to express a feminist project? I mean, your feminist project, but maybe any feminist project. And for instance, we've discussed that already, but you've been reading us a poem on the mother-daughter relationship, and feminist mothering, and mothering in general has always been a difficult spot for feminism, both theoretically and also practically, I think. So maybe you could tell us a bit more on how poetry enabled you to explore that, and why do you think it was a good medium at that moment for you, and maybe not another?
I think it's a very interesting question, but yeah, if I were to really think back and ask myself, why have I written so many poems? In fact, I could bring out a whole volume on that, this whole question of mother and daughter relationship. And it's really interesting, and I think many of us go through that. It's a question of a psychological tension that comes up, a kind of acute tension between a mother and daughter, and particularly if there are two strong identities, And those two identities, unless the mother sheds her authority, stamp of authority, and which is very difficult, and that's why the daughter keeps saying, let go, I mean, I did it to my mother, my daughter does it to me, and it's a continuity, continuities that you see there. Now, those tensions, I don't think I could have personally, in my personal life, I don't think I could have been great friends with my daughter if I were not to write poetry. As a conscious, very, very conscious feminist, I was extremely sure that I didn't want motherhood to be glorified. I did not want to romanticize motherhood, right? So how do you do that? And yet be caring, and you want to be caring, you are still nourishing, you keep nourishing, cherishing your, the idea of motherhood, but how do you break away from it? And I also realized that, this whole process of, bringing up a daughter, and I began to empathize with my mother far greater. So it continues like that, I'm quite sure. I mean, there I want to be just a woman, a woman with no features. But I'm sharing my womanhood with all women, in that kind of situation. And if you notice that, I don't know where that painting is, maybe up there, which I can't see, yeah. You probably can see that. That painting, as well as the one that is there, many of my paintings do not have facial features. They do not have facial. But what I'm trying to capture here is the elemental woman.
One of the things I'd like to pick on is this idea of representing women, because I think that also came out in the quotes that Leila read at the beginning. That it has been a huge issue for women's studies, and then for gender studies, and now for queer studies, which is, how do you speak about women once you consider that being a woman is something you construct, something that politically and scientifically you don't want to fix. You don't want to say this is woman, because that would be wrong, like, politically as a feminist, and that would be problematic scientifically. So I think representing women in scientific discourses then can become very difficult. And maybe it's there that there can be a kind of complementarity between a representation in science, in the visual arts, and in literature or poetry in your case.
Yeah, you see, when you look at particularly partition literature, and you notice that there was a silence of a certain kind, a very deafening silence, I would say, a deafening silence. Good expression. Yeah, because I mean, for nearly 30 to 40 years, nobody is writing on what the women went through at the time of partition. It's amazing. It's only when Urvashi Butalia, Ritu Menon picked up, this whole idea of going to talk to women who got affected by a partition, and then some narratives came out. But my interest also was to look at the literature that came out of partition and how women figure in that literature. And I have, I always feel that, in as far as social sciences are concerned, when a historian or sociologist is picking up this material, they are going to, do live interviews, etc., surveys as they are called. And I've often asked Urvashi this question, and she agrees with me that, memory does play tricks. So if you are really, trying to interview somebody who's gone through an experience, say 30 years ago or 40 years ago of violence, abduction, rape, whatever, then some changes are going to happen through memory because it's getting filtered. And either you get sort of absolute bitterness out of it, or you get frozen anger of some sort, or if some filtration has happened and some ingestion has happened, digestion has happened, that, it changes the original experience of maybe forgiveness or whatever that might come in. But the literature that was produced, partition literature, it captures what you call, the variety of womanhood in one sense, which I, yes, trespassed on that area when I said, I'm trying to locate the primal woman. And yes, there is a danger of homogenization there. There is a danger. So what are the varieties? We need to keep an eye on that. The moment we talk about, the homogenization part, then there's something else that comes in. I mean, these work in reverse order also. So what I'm trying to say is that when I did examine a lot of literature that came out of partition, right, whether it was men writers or women writers, they captured a huge variety of experiences of women who were raped. And if you make a diachronic study, what happens in 50s, 60s, 70s, you can see the traveling experience, the way experience travels over time. And then all of it sometimes gets regenerated or revived because something else has happened. Maybe Gujarat happened in 2002 or whatever. And so some of those experiences come back and, again, the passion for expression comes in. So the point is that in the context of remembering, I thought that, it's like re-remembering. So the dismemberment that happened through violence, in the idea of writing, was remembered.
At the same time, at some other point you mentioned Sylvia Plath as an influence, and you referred to this very strong poem, Daddy, in which she compares her father to the Holocaust, and she describes herself as a Jew, so there's a lot of violence in this poem. So, I was not sure I understood how in both aspects can be reconciled. Father as, extreme violence, as beyond all imagination, and the kind of, positive memories you
Now, in the becoming of the woman, it's the construction of that gender that takes place. And you unwittingly have imbibed a lot which you are passing on to your children. You will. Even if you're a feminist, you will. Because there is an inevitability of the community's voices which are running into your psyche. Now, the deconstruction would also mean somewhere reconstruction has to happen. If deconstruction stops at the level of destruction, then you become a bitter, cynic, screaming feminist. Then you're screaming and you do bra burning and you come to the street and then it's a combat and all of that. But if you are able to internalize that and work it out in such a way that it becomes a project for humanity.
I've grown up with two brothers, and elder brothers, one's 31, one's 27, and I'm the third daughter, youngest. And I mean, it's like everything that I do which is equal to what they would have done at my age, it's like an achievement, it's not something normal. And I think that's what a lot of, I have very liberal parents, but, and I do a lot of things which maybe someone else my age wouldn't, another girl living in India my age wouldn't be allowed to do. But it's a struggle, it's a fight every day getting things that my brothers already got normally. And at some point you start wondering whether you're being unreasonable. Because you're living with your parents, you're not being unreasonable, but it's like you're forcing them to, allow you to do certain things which are not considered to be normal for a girl to do.